Thanks, guys. If you have your Bibles, hope that you do. Turn with me to Luke chapter 1. We're going to look into that old familiar Christmas story. So much of our time spent here on a Sunday morning and Wednesday night and other moments is in response to the decision-making of human beings and trying to encourage us to make sure that we make the right decisions, that we make good choices, to figure out what we do whenever we've made wrong choices and how to get on the right path. We try to encourage people with the concept and a proper vision of who God is. You know, so often we think about God like a kind of a crotchety old man who's telling us to get off his yard, and the commands that he's giving us is trying to withhold our fun in some way. But instead, the reality is that we have a loving Father who doesn't give us commands to try to withhold our fun, but instead tries to give us commands, tries to push us in the direction toward life, tries to withhold pain from us. And so much of the time that we spend here on Sunday morning, on Thursday nights, Wednesday nights, and small groups and discipleship is just about the importance of making good decisions, of dealing with life as you've made the wrong choices and how to make those right, and then trying to prevent us from making bad choices. But not all of life is dependent upon our own choices. And a good amount of our life is not things that we choose, but things that seemingly choose us. What do you do when life takes you a direction that you never desired to go? When it throws you a curveball in some way that you were never equipped to hit? How do you handle the pain, the grief, the sorrow? How do you deal with the uncertainty? And how does our faith impact those moments? What is it that a believer in Jesus can hold on to that is so radically different than anybody else? How is it that how God has rescued us and His grace upon our lives, how does that influence how we feel in the moments when the diagnosis comes? When we're saying goodbye? When the pink slip is handed to us? When the child rebels, when the spouse leaves, when the FBI shows up? How do we handle it when we're dealing with something that wasn't our choice, wasn't our decision, was never a path we wanted to go down? We're going to look at that today. And we're going to use a familiar passage, and yet one that tends to get a little bit overlooked this time of year in Luke chapter 1. So much time is spent on the early part of that familiar Christmas story that sometimes we miss Mary's response. And there's actually a psalm of thanksgiving that's here in Luke chapter 1. And let's read those words beginning in verse number 46. And Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For He has looked on the humble estate of His servant. For behold, from now on all generations will call me blessed. For He who is mighty has done great things for me, and holy is His name. And His mercy is for those who fear Him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with His arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts from their hearts. He has brought down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of humble estate. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich He has sent away empty. He has helped His servant Israel in remembrance of His mercy, as He spoke to our fathers, to Abraham, and to his offspring forever." And Mary remained with her about 3 months and returned to her home. There are two common problems that humanity tends to have. We've been in this series for 3 months now about Be Human, and we're kind of out of that now. We're in the Christmas season, and starting in January, we're going to begin a new series. But for the last 3 or so months, we've been looking at this concept of how we have this plight in which so often we strip ourselves of our own humanity. And so whether we're trying to be like a God or trying to be like a machine, or we think that we are like an animal, the encouragement that we've had over these last few months is to embrace our humanity, embrace who God created us to be, embrace who God has made us to be. And the only way we can fully do that is to recognize that humanity was created by God Himself. And so it's not until we have a true picture of who God is that we can even understand who God has created us to be. But there's an aspect of this be human concept that we haven't talked very much about. And that is, not only do we have the propensity so often to forget our own humanity or try to be something other than that, there's a great human temptation to look at other people in a way other than human. And it goes one of two ways. We either try to deify them and make them a god, or we degrade them and dehumanize them. And we see it all the time. We tend to strip the humanity of other people. We try to show that they have no value whatsoever. And this now justifies what is happening to them, or it justifies what we want to do to them. There is no way that you can be racist or sexist and truly view somebody as another human being. Instead, in order to do that, you have to see them as less than, as something other than. And so we do that all the time. We dehumanize people. And that then justifies our ability to lord over them in some way, to feel entitled to something that they shouldn't get, to hoard all the resources for ourselves, and in no way to give whatsoever. We do this on a continual basis. It empowers us now to speak words to them that we would never speak to another human being. But because we have stripped them of their value and no longer seen them as created in the image of God, we can do whatever it is that we wish. It's a common human tendency. We do it to politicians. We do it to other groups of people. We do it in the worst of moments, even to spouses or parents or children. We forget that God has created them in His image. We forget the dignity of their basic humanity. And then the consequences of that are horrific. But there's a second temptation. The second temptation is we tend to deify some people. We strip them of their humanity as well, but in doing so, we don't push them downward to begin to explain away the bad things in their lives or to begin to explain how we're treating them poorly. And instead, we strip them of their humanity and we put them up on a pedestal. And we do this in part to begin to justify why they are obedient and we can't be. Why they're doing the right things and we've chosen not to. We just treat them as though they are something else. And so even some of what we would consider the best of humanity, we become almost code words for people who are something other than us. And so being a Mother Teresa or a Billy Graham, there's just this kind of exalted nature of this. When in reality, that's unfair to them as well. And maybe nowhere is this more seen within biblical concepts than within the Christmas story and that of Mary. Now, I understand there's a theological difference that we're going to have here with some of our Catholic friends. But it is a temptation, I think, of humanity to look at a story like the Christmas story, to see God move in a miraculous way in a young woman's life, in a way that is solely unique to her. And the temptation now is to, instead of seeing her as a human being, instead of seeing God now working in the midst of humanity, to set her aside and to begin to say there's something mighty about her. There's something unique and special about her that is so distinct from us that we can't relate in any way whatsoever. And yet the biblical story is not that. The miracle of Christmas is that God chose to come down in the form of a baby. And He was born to a very common woman. And yet as we deify Mary, as we treat her as co-equal with Jesus in the redemption story, as we assume that she never sinned and she had some kind of immaculate conception to keep her from sinning in any way whatsoever, as we do that, it's understandable as we do that, but what we're doing in that moment is we're pushing aside all of her obedience and saying, well that doesn't matter, that's not comparable to us in any way because she was uniquely God and we're not. And in so doing, I think we lose so much of the power of this Christmas story. And so often we deify Mary and we think to ourselves, well, yeah, she's special and she's unique. We can't relate to this at all. And yet I think whenever Luke writes his gospel, he so focuses on Mary and Elizabeth as well in order to give us an insight into the story. Mary, to me, is not this deified being that we can't understand or see, but instead, Mary, to me, maybe the most human person in this story, the very person that we should understand the most, that we should comprehend the most. And so here she was, this seemingly little girl, this girl that would be far too young in our minds or our concepts to be carrying now the Son of God. It works that way, doesn't it? Doesn't it work that way that whenever our daughters begin to grow up, that they're growing up faster than what we want them to? And I stand here on a regular basis and look into the eyes of fathers as they're giving their little girls away in marriage, and I can see it written all over their faces. She's just too young, they think. Now, sometimes that's not written over their faces. Sometimes it's, hey, I want rid of her, right? But the really fun stories are in those moments in which the father is trembling. I've told you this before, but we'll stand right over there in the hallway, and I'll be talking to the groom, and I always ask the groom, especially if it's kind of a young couple, I ask the groom, do you want me to make your father-in-law cry? And they always say yes. Although sometimes they'll say, oh, you can't. And I'm like, oh, I can. And then we come to this moment, and there are times in which I have such compassion on the father that I'll get him teared up, and I will get uncomfortable with it, and I'll cut it off. But there are other times in which I drive in the dagger. I just love the moment. I feel the vulnerability in that moment, and the son-in-law thinks his father-in-law will never cry, and he's about to see an ugly cry that he'll never forget. But we see our daughters in that moment as being too young. That's Mary here. Too young. Mary now in the society that doesn't respect women hardly at all. Mary in the society that it was all about men, and it was all about power, and it was all about age, and it was all about wisdom. That's what was respected in this society. And if you didn't have some combination of those things, then you had no value whatsoever. Here's Mary out in the field, and suddenly an angel appears to her and says, "Greetings, O favored one." Now, if Mary was deified, if there was something special and unique about Mary that's unlike us, then Mary in that moment is going to go, yes. That's going to be the expectation that, yeah, that's how you greet me. If I'm special, if I'm unique, that's how you greet me. But she doesn't respond that way. Instead, the angel says, "Greetings, O favored one." And the text says that Mary was deeply troubled and afraid. Do you immediately identify with that? Deeply troubled. Have you noticed that's been a pattern? It's been a pattern over these few weeks. This deeply troubled and afraid. What are you afraid about today? What is it that has your attention? What circumstance is going a direction in a way that you can't stop, and you're fearful about the end game? What uncertainty is present within your life right now, and you know that it's just a razor's edge, that it could very easily tilt in a positive way, but it could equally as easily tilt in a negative way. And you have influence there, and you have say, and maybe you're feeling the weight and the pressure of the world on your shoulders because you think to yourself that if I don't just say the right thing, if I don't just do the right thing here, if my actions are not perfect, if my knowledge is not perfect, and I don't choose the right way, this could go a negative way, when in reality you know all too well it's not all on you. You're afraid, troubled, now an unrestful spirit. You see, we can deify Mary here and think that she didn't have any of this, didn't feel any of this, that the angel came to her and said, "Hey, you're going to be pregnant." She said, "Hot dog, let's go." But where's the humanity in that? I don't care how great your marriage is and how great your circumstance is. My guess is the first time you ever got pregnant, you might have been thrilled, but you were still terrified. And if you weren't paying attention. You need to spend an hour every Sunday down this hallway, and you'll begin to understand these little people are scary. But here's Mary, now confronted with an angel. And he says, you have found favor with God. And even that proclamation, even the proclamation that we think that we would all want, still terrifies her, because Mary is thinking, who am I to be here? And if God is at play, I'm not sure I want to be involved. Like, I want to see God from a distance. I'm not sure I want to see him up close. And the angel tries to calm her. And then he proclaims the news. You're going to be pregnant. The Messiah is coming to you. But what the nation of Israel has longed for all of these years. Now, after 400 years of silence, now after generation upon generation now of uncertainty, of longing for God to make things right, of good kings and bad kings, of times of great prosperity and times of tremendous sorrow and suffering. Now what the nation has waited for is here, and it's coming through you. Mary wanted no part of that. She's overwhelmed. And the angel now assures her that God has chosen her, and it's going to be okay. And he says, almost as a sign now, hey, you're not going to be in this totally alone. Your relative Elizabeth, she's already pregnant. Maybe you don't know it yet, but she's already pregnant. And her baby now is going to go before yours. He's going to kind of set the stage for yours. But you can take hope, because God is with you. The angel leaves. And in that moment, because we deify Mary, we write this very cute Christmassy story of, oh, a happy bride who's now pregnant and everything is right. No. An unwanted teenage pregnancy in a culture that doesn't accept them in any way whatsoever. Shame and guilt and sorrow just inflicted from her own self. Not to mention the scorn of her mama and her daddy, the disappointment in her daddy's eyes. Not to mention now the judgment and the shame that would come from the future in-laws. The disillusionment and the doubt from her fiance. This is not a path she wanted to go down. This was not something that she would have chosen on her own. And yet she has this faith, and obviously she's been given a gift in this miraculous intervention by the angel, and she has this trust. But as soon as the angel leaves, you know how this works. As soon as the angel leaves, she begins to doubt herself. And now she's tossed back and forth between wanting to be a faithful servant of God. That God, however you want it to be with me, that's how it's going to be. But at the same time, being this struggling human being of, God, what have you done to me? And she goes to visit Elizabeth. And as she visits Elizabeth announces that, man, as you approached and my baby heard your voice, it leapt within me. It's a foreshadowing now of things to come, of how John the Baptist is going to be the precursor to Jesus. He is going to preach this gospel of repentance, this preparation now for the Messiah, that at this very moment, as he understands the nearness of Jesus, even in embryo, he begins to dance. And for Mary, it could be that for Mary, it's the first tangible outward sign that what God said was true. And now here she is in this place of faith and doubt. In this road that she doesn't want to go down, in a road that is not of her own choosing. And she responds with a prayer of thanksgiving. It's what good Jews do. It takes on the sound of Psalm 103. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all your benefits. And so Mary says, my soul magnifies the Lord in verse 47, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. And we hear those words and we think, God, that's who I want to be. I want to be the kind of guy that when faced with the turmoil of life, when faced with the challenge of life, that whenever you place me on a road I would not have chosen, but it's the road that you have chosen for me, I want to stand strong in that moment, and I want to boldly proclaim as a faithful servant that my soul magnifies the Lord, my spirit rejoices in God. But so often that isn't me. And I want to be a man of bold faith. But the moment things begin to go in a way I don't like, I tend to be a trembling little boy, saying, God, what are you doing? Where are you? Is this really where I'm supposed to be? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? But is it possible that that's the tone in which Mary is saying this as well? You see, here's the problem with us, I think. We read the words in the Bible so often with an assumption. And the assumption is an assumption of faithful obedience from whoever we're reading. And if we're not very careful, we can begin to deify or at minimize sanctify some of these biblical characters and to put them at a level of faith that we ourselves could never experience. And we do so in part, I think, to justify our own apathy, indifference, and to begin to explain away some of our own fear. But you know what I think is far more often the case? The Psalms are not bold proclamations of belief, proclaimed for others to hear in the midst of no doubt of the psalmist. I think the Psalms are so often recited words of confession of things I want to believe, spoken to nobody but us and God. Of God, this is who I want to be. Help me be that. This is totally inappropriate. But I'm 40 now. I can do these kind of things, right? Every time on Facebook, I see a guy write about how smoking hot his wife is, my first thought is, he doesn't believe it. He's trying to convince himself. Now, if your husband wrote that this week, do not hit him at this moment. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you a pass. I'm going to give you one smoking hot per year. Okay? Just it's a sign of encouragement to your wife, right? And what better way to do that than to quote Ricky Bobby? And so I'm going to give you one a year. But you show me somebody who keeps on saying that, I don't think they believe it. I think they're trying to give the perception of it, and maybe they're trying to convince themselves. So often what we say is not necessarily 100% reflection of what we believe. Sometimes we say what we want to believe. And while that might be hypocrisy in other places, here's the irony. Whenever it comes to faith, it's not hypocrisy. It's life. The songs that we sing here on Sunday morning, there are times in which we sing these songs as bold proclamations of what we believe. But far more often, what we are singing in this moment is, God, this is what I want to believe. Make it true in my life. Remind me of these truths. Remind me of these facts. And so is it possible that Mary here, in the midst of this doubt and confusion, this wanting to be a faithful believer and yet uncertain about this road that she does not want to go down, experiencing all this shame and yet having this glory that has been given from God, is it possible that in this moment that yes, she is proclaiming what she believes, but at the same time she's saying, God, help my unbelief? And so notice what she does. This prayer of thanksgiving. She begins to remind herself of everything that God has done. He has looked on the humble estate. He has done great things. His mercy is for those. He has shown strength. He has scattered. He has brought down. He has exalted. He has filled. He has helped. He has spoken. Notice the pattern there. Mary now, I think this good, faithful Jew who's been trained in the Psalms, is channeling her inward Psalm 103. And in the midst of this road that she does not want to go down, in the midst of this uncertainty, she is now, I think, trying to win her heart. She's trying to convince her faith to walk strong, to believe, to be bold, to be obedient in this time that she probably wants to run, in this time where she probably wants to give up, in this time in which she is probably overwhelmed by the circumstances of life, abandoned possibly by her parents, shamed by her in-laws, doubted by her fiance, almost excommunicated from her faith and from her community. In this moment, the only one that she has is God, and I think she is trying to encourage her heart. Now, in the midst of this, you can trust Him. And that's the human side of this story. And I think it's the real one. And I think that this action of thanksgiving, this action of faith, in the midst of the doubt, this rehearsing of the truth of who God is, notice where she goes with this. She goes to the actions of God in the past, His faithfulness throughout the generations, His history with the nation of Israel. She doesn't deny what's happened to her in the moment. She recognizes it, and she even begins to remind herself, generations from now are going to call me blessed. The generations to come are going to call me blessed. Notice what's not being said there. Because her generation is not going to call her blessed. The generation above her is not going to call her blessed. They're going to call her shamed. And so in this moment, she is reminding herself of the truth that is to come. Reminding herself of God's faithfulness all throughout the past. And as she weds those two things together, as she remembers what God has done in the past and she clings hold to the promises of what God will do in the future, that empowers her in the present. And so where are you today? What is that fear? What is that uncertainty? And yes, we primarily can take this through the lens of being on a road not of our own choosing, but even if you are on a road of your own choosing, that now that you've gotten down the path a little bit, it's not giving you what you wanted. It's not giving you what you expected. What do you do? How is it that you can be the person that you want to be? How is it that you can have faith in that moment? I think so much of it is you begin to mimic the very human pattern of Mary here. You remember what God has done. It's an amazing thing. I can very rarely tell you what God is doing in the moment, but I can look back and almost tell you in exacting detail what God has done in the past. I can almost begin to explain to you why some things have happened exactly the way that they've happened. And looking back, because God's work in the past is so abundantly clear. It's so abundantly clear that the only way for me to doubt His presence at this very moment is for me to forget about what God has done in the past. And so I begin to recount it. I'm reminded that long before I ever showed up, there was a plan in place. And yet, even whenever I came on the scene, that God loved me before I even knew myself. And that God has shown His faithfulness in spite of my own faithlessness. That time and time again, in the moments of tremendous fear and overwhelming suffering and uncertainty, that God has proven Himself faithful. Which means in this moment of doubt, He will do so again. And even as I recount what God has done in the past, I then look forward to the promises of what are to come. The great hope, the knowledge that He has not let go of me in this moment, the knowledge that He has the ability to work all things together for the good of those who loved Him, who were called according to His purpose, the great hope of heaven when all suffering will be taken away, the knowledge that whatever sorrow comes in my life at this moment, there is a sunset that will come to it, and yet joy itself, there is no end to its days. And you begin to have hope in what is to come. And as you understand how God has worked in the past, and as you have faith how God will work in the future, you are reminded of his presence with you in the now. And that empowers you to obey. It empowers you now to follow after him. And it opens your eyes in a sense of awareness that God is up to some things. And so it causes you to begin to look around. It creates an inquisitiveness, a curiosity in this moment of God, I want to see what you're going to do. It's an amazing thing as a pastor that I could look at circumstances and situations within your own life and almost have a kind of pastoral giddiness of, I know when your life is in upheaval that God is up to something, and I can't wait to see what God is going to do with you. For some reason, I don't always feel that with me. And yet it's equally true. That whenever there is doubt and fear and uncertainty and God has placed you on a road you do not want to go down, you can have great hope to know that he is with you. And isn't that the story of Mary? How is it that God would entrust the gospel, the future of his kingdom, all into this very human little girl? And how is it that she was supposed to endure so much and still find a way to obey? Well, to the extent that Mary understood that God was with her, she was faithful. Wasn't perfect. She was faithful. And to the extent that you and I today know that God is with us, we'll be faithful. And he is with you. No matter how great your shame, no matter how overwhelming your sorrow, no matter how deep your grief, no matter how uncertain this road, whether it is the result of your own decision making or just a divine assignment from God himself, he is with you. He is with you. He is with us. Would you bow your heads in prayer?